A while back, I did a program about non-sugar sweeteners. I call them non-sugar because some of them would fall under the category of artificial sweeteners. Some of them would be more natural. Some of them are sugar alcohols. And there's just a lot of ways you can sweeten things without actually using sugar. And virtually, well, let me not say virtually, but most of them are not going to raise your blood sugar much. Some will raise it a bit. Most will not raise it much. So I wanted to share a couple comments left under that video. This person says, if most of the zero index sweeteners in the list still raise your insulin level because they are sensed that they are sweet, in other words, your body gets kind of fooled, and you eat something that's been sweetened with Splenda or erythritol or stevia or whatever, and your body says, oh, there's something sweet, so let's release some insulin. So he says, if that's true, and your body's releasing insulin because of these non-sugar sweeteners, so it doesn't raise your blood sugar, but why is that better since your insulin levels are still surging? The resulting high insulin would prevent your liver from burning fat, so the result would be just as bad. If you cannot burn your fat because of higher insulin, then your body will become undernourished. This sounds also bad if even the sweetener has no calories. Okay, so he's making the point that if they're not going to raise your blood sugar, but they do provoke an insulin release, then are you really doing yourself any favors? Well, that's a good question. And I will acknowledge that sometimes when I will have something that has been sweetened artificially or with stevia or a non-sugar sweetener, my blood sugar will actually drop a bit. And that tells me my body is indeed being fooled, and my body's sensing the sweetness of what I'm eating, whether it be or drinking, like a Diet Coke, or eating a keto dessert sweetened with erythritol, allulose, xylitol, Splenda, whatever. So my body's sensing something sweet and saying, pancreas, release some insulin. And I agree that we want to limit our insulin release as best we can. So they're saying, well, that's just about as bad. What's the point? Why would you even fool with anything that's going to cause an insulin release? Well, number one, in most cases, if I do get a drop in my blood sugar, which means, yeah, your body's released a bit of insulin, it's a small drop. It's like going from 98 to 92. It's never a huge drop. It's never like you go from 98 down to 65. So if my body is being tricked, which I suppose it may well be, it's not tricked that much. It's tricked just a little bit. It's fooled a little bit. And it just gives a little bonus release of insulin. Now, I will say this, I don't worry so much about those little releases of insulin. If I eat a piece of apple pie with ice cream on top, and my body senses all those carbs and all that sugar, and it's going to dump out an enormous amount of insulin to try to deal with that. And especially if you're insulin resistant, it's going to dump out 2 times, 3 times, 5 times as much insulin as a normal person would. So yeah, you're flooded. You're afloat on an ocean of insulin in such cases, along with the high glucose, because you're even with all that insulin, your body can't keep up. You don't process sugars and carbs well. That's a major problem. But if you have a Diet Coke or you have a small keto dessert and you were at 100 and now you're at 92 and you have a bit of a drop, yeah, there's probably been an insulin release, but not that big a one. And I just don't think it's worth it if you're just having occasional non-sugar sweeteners here and there. If you're doing it all the time, could be a problem. I don't worry about it when it's just a small drop. So part of the issue is not just, is there an insulin release? The fact is our bodies were made to release insulin. Insulin is not an evil character in and of itself when it's at normal levels. But when you're trying to overcome fatty liver and diabetes, then you want to keep your insulin on the low side for sure. But the goal is never to say, well, I don't want to ever release a single drop of insulin. That kind of puts you at a type 1 level. Because that's what they do. They don't release any insulin at all. Their pancreas doesn't work, period. And they're not in good shape. If they don't take insulin, they'll die. So the goal is never, I don't ever want any insulin release in my life, but we do want to limit it for sure. All right, here's one other comment made about the non-sugar sweetener video I made. Thank you, Dennis, for this information. The only thing I'd like to add, which is very important, is that many people cannot tolerate sugar alcohols. Erythritol is just one of many in their gastrointestinal system. I started the keto diet 18 months ago and I lost 40 pounds so far. But for a long time, I experienced intermittent bloating, diarrhea, watery stools, gas, and lower stomach cramping with sharp pains. I have always had a sweet tooth and looked for sugar alternatives. I should have done better research, but when I did, I found that I was experiencing every bad side effect of sugar alcohols, plus my weight loss stalled. I can't describe how different I felt when I stopped using sugar alcohols, particularly erythritol, because it's in everything keto. It felt like a calming effect on my stomach. Most stevia products use erythritol as their first ingredient. They call themselves stevia, but if you look at the ingredients, their number one ingredient is erythritol, not stevia. I don't know why that's even legal for a product to be called stevia when it's the number two ingredient and not the number one. So, absolutely true that sugar alcohols can and often will loosen your stools and give you either diarrhea or just loose bowel movements. Very, very loose. You'll end up using a lot more toilet paper. I hate to be so graphic, but I mean, that may well be the case. I would say probably with over half the people. I don't know what it is. Now, sugar alcohols are not the only way you can sweeten products. Allulose, for example, is a sweetener, a non-sugar sweetener, and it's not a sugar alcohol. Splenda is a non-sugar sweetener. It's not a sugar alcohol, but the problem with Splenda, if you buy it by the bag in the granulated form, is that it has maltodextrin and sometimes dextrose. So it's got sugar-raising properties with what they pack with it. The better form of Splenda is a liquid form of Splenda. They don't put in that maltodextrin and all the other stuff. It's just pure Splenda, and it will work better, and it will not give you the diarrhea. So a lot of people, when they first go low carb, they have the opposite problem. They have constipation, and then they start learning about these keto desserts and how you can use erythritol to sweeten things, and they buy some pancake syrup that's non-sugar, but it's got sugar alcohols, and they find out they don't have constipation anymore. But the problem is, in many cases, they've got the other side of things. They've got very loose stools, and it can be a real problem. I would say, number one, just don't use any sweeteners all the time. Make sure that you learn to just have them occasionally. Have keto desserts 1 or 2 days a week, maybe 3, but not any more than that. It'd be better with your coffee not to use any kind of a sugar alcohol sweetener. You can buy pure stevia, and if you do, you use a tiny little bit. I will often have a big cup of coffee, and I will sweeten it with pure stevia. But I use a tiny little, it's like 1/8 of a teaspoon, and I don't even fill that up all the way. And it can sweeten an entire large mug of coffee. Very powerful. But the stevia you buy in bags at the grocery store, number one, is probably going to have a lot of other stuff in it that's not so good. And erythritol can be a real problem. So if you've been into the low-carb keto movement for a while, you've learned how to make these marvelous keto desserts, and you're having either diarrhea or just very loose stools, very loose bowel movements, you might want to watch your sugar alcohols and try to move away from them as much as you can. Occasionally probably wouldn't be a problem. We had one guy say, they left a comment, he said, I don't eat sugar alcohols anymore. He said, if I did, I'd have to spend too much money on toilet paper or something like that. So I thought that was funny. But sugar alcohols can be a problem. They can also raise blood sugar a bit. They're not the perfect non-spiking, but they're better than sugar in that account. But they can really give you those loose bowel movements and bloating and so forth. So be careful and experiment. You're going to have to decide what works for you and what doesn't. The one thing that we do not want, of course, is high glucose and high insulin, but also we want to be wise in our use of the non-sugar sweeteners. That's it for now. God bless. See you again soon. Probably most of you know my wife Benedicta, but few of you know the amazing paths God has led her to bring her to where she is today. Benedicta was orphaned at an early age and lived with an elderly stepmother growing to adolescence. They were so poor, Benedicta had to drop out of school and sell food door to door for them to survive. As a teen, Benedicta got a job as a housemaid, which developed into a nightmare. She was required to cook, clean, wash, take care of the children, and she had to get up at 4 a.m. every day just to get her work started. Worse than that, she was frequently beaten. At around 20, she moved to the huge city of Lagos, where she started her own little business. Sometimes she prospered, but at other times she nearly starved and went days at a time without eating. At one point, she became so sick she passed out in her room and nearly died. She found herself outside of her body, and she was able to see the splendors of heaven until she was sent back with a command to share her story. One day, however, her life changed when an American evangelist came to her community to preach. And of course, that was me. The rest, as they say, is history. Benedicta has shared her life story in a recently published autobiography, and you can get it on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback. A link to this book on Amazon is in the description.